Good evening and welcome to another edition of the Debrief Podcast. I'm Josh Durso, coming to you from the FingerLakes1.com studio at North Park, joined as always by my co-host Jackie Augustine. Whew, it's been busy, and this is a special primetime edition of the podcast. So much has gone on since the last time we were here. It was just literally 2 weeks ago.
I know.
And here we are, buried again.
And yeah, it seems like this was required to happen quickly because the things are just piling up. There's been a lot of craziness going on around here.
That there has. Now, probably the craziest of the crazy is the ongoing dilemma, debate, issue in Seneca Falls, which now, in the last 24 hours, has come to a new and exciting point. Yeah. A new Article 78 has been filed. A group of concerned citizens led by Waterloo Container filed an Article 78 against the Seneca Falls Town Board and the town itself as an entity. The lawsuit alleges that administrative steps were skipped or missed, of course, which is exactly what Seneca Meadows alleged when they filed an Article 78 when an opposing law was passed. And the last time we talked about this, I really came down in the arena of we're in this perpetual state of swinging back and forth. And this is just us reaching another apex of the pendulum, and we're getting ready to swing back again. Seneca Falls Supervisor Greg Lazaro had some really harsh remarks for the folks who pushed to make this happen. It's been described by some as a vendetta carried out by a particular group of individuals. Annette Lutz obviously was previously on the board, passed the controversial Local Law Number 3 of 2016. Local Law Number 2 reversed it. But here we are again, and living through it. You know, Lazaro called it frivolous. Supervisor Lazaro referred to this lawsuit as frivolous and that it would take time, money, and effort to fight it, which, of course, can be said about any, legal anything. What's your take? What's your take on it, seeing this happen now? I don't think we would have necessarily been talking about this issue had this not come up in the last 24 or so hours. So I guess I'm kind of curious what you're thinking now as the outsider in this situation.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I don't understand why the town board would not have anticipated a filing like this, because, they have to go through, for their local law passage, a bunch of administrative steps, and part of that is like environmental review. Right. And to try to say that a landfill expansion has no environmental impact whatsoever doesn't make any sense. It seems like a shortcut. So why not just say, if they believe this, that there is an environmental impact, but it's counterbalanced by economic impact? Or so for me, I feel like when people try to take shortcuts and cut corners and get sloppy about things because they just feel like they're right and they can do what they want, it is going to come back at you because these protocols are in place for a reason. So for me, I feel like they made their own bed. They need to lie in it because the conduct all around has not been the most professional display. And when things are sloppy, then you open yourself up to litigation in that way. So in the interest of doing Seneca Falls' business, it seems like they need to get their act together and be a little more thorough.
So something that you just mentioned that makes me ask this question, and maybe you know the answer to it. Can the economic part come into the equation when the SECRA is actually being evaluated and when you're going through those environmental steps?
Yeah, actually, I mean, part of the environmental review. Now, let me step back a second. I haven't been a participant in a SECRA review for about 2 years now, so maybe the process has changed. but I can't imagine that the spirit of it has changed. A seeker allows for you to talk about community impact broadly construed. So even though it's called an environmental impact statement, environmental concerns are only part of it. Social, community development, economic development concerns are all part of the equation also.
Right.
So if the town officials don't know that or have chosen to ignore it, that's maybe even more troubling, that they didn't take the time. That makes it seem like maybe there weren't enough eyes on it,
right.
That they didn't catch that, because, yeah, you've got to be thorough about this kind of stuff.
Now, of course, there have been all the other little caveats that have come along with this issue. Obviously, signs were once again banned from the room itself, and having been to a number of meetings in the new facility in Seneca Falls, the one defense that I have of the decision to ban signs is that it is an incredibly small room, which when you put signs in the room becomes even smaller.
Right.
And these meetings have become really, really well attended for, at the local level. You're talking on average, usually 50 to 60 people. I'm guessing. I don't quote me on that. But I can defend it to that side. And I think we talked about this a little bit before, the visual of it, like how people receive the idea that, sorry, no signs are allowed. When you have someone making, or a board even for that matter, making a decision to unilaterally ban them, it sends the wrong message, and it kind of sets the wrong tone, I feel like.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, I am not a free speech expert, but political speech takes a lot of forms. Not everybody's comfortable coming up to a podium or a microphone and saying their piece. Sometimes they want to express themselves through applause, or through a sign, or through wearing a particular T-shirt, like happened at the city council meeting in Geneva last night. People find different ways, whatever their comfort level is, to be politically engaged. So if a board creates a public forum, the obligation is on them to make sure that the people who it's open to can actually participate. So when you say that there are no signs, basically you're inviting only the most vocal people willing to come to the microphone to participate in your process. And I don't see, first of all, I just feel like it's wrong to do that, to limit dialogue. But second, practically speaking, I'm no fan of the position that the town board is taking, but to do what they're doing in such a poorly constructed way doesn't make any sense. Why would you want to create a more adversarial relationship than you already have?
Right.
And yeah, it's just kind of throwing fuel on the fire, I think.
And I feel like that's been part of the message from the other side, is that, some people who see the opposition to landfilling, or the environmentally friendly side, we'll call it, a lot of people feel that they're just fanning the flames and trying, because they didn't get their way when the law was passed. But, one of the interesting remarks that I've heard so far is that, when Supervisor Lazaro was very, very specific in his remarks over the last 24 hours since the lawsuit, or since the Article 78 was filed. Now, where was that when Seneca Meadows was the one filing the Article 78?
Right.
And, obviously time will tell in terms of how that, what that balance, history will define how the reaction was on each side. That said, it kind of, I want to get back to the point here. We're in this swing back and forth, and every time something like this happens, it takes away from the economic development conversation. Right. It takes away from the even the tourism, the women's history, all of the different aspects that Seneca Falls is famous for and has going for it. It just, this issue just continues to suck the life out of every other item.
Yeah, that's true.
And there comes a point where now you have an Article 78, and this, in theory, could last years. This is not something...
Yeah, I don't know how quickly they have to make a decision on those, because I think while there's a pending Article 78, I think that kind of binds the hands of the group of, in moving forward. I think that has to be resolved first. So I'm not sure what impact that really has or what the timeline is, but yeah, I mean, your point is totally valid that there's only so much time that these boards have to do business. Mm-hmm. And if that time is being used on an issue that they just can't get right, I mean, whatever side you're on, right? Mm-hmm. Someone feels like it's wrong and they can't find a way to reach any resolution, that just pushes everything else to the back burner. So I would suggest they try a different strategy. I don't know necessarily what that is, but
it's an election year for two of the board members on the Seneca Falls Town Board, and I part of me says that this will be resolved if the Article 78 is withdrawn and a new local law is passed, basically reenacting what was local law 3. And here again, this is what I mean, where we're stuck in this perpetual swing back and forth, and it creates a really toxic environment in Seneca Falls, just objectively looking at all of the facts, no pun intended. Not the only toxic issue here in the region, but of course everyone last night, Geneva City Council met. What was that like? You spoke, obviously. A lot of others did as well on the Foundry issue. Do you feel like the city of Geneva is making some progress?
Well, as I tried to say at the podium, there are kind of two linked but very separate issues on this point. So there's the actual cleanup that is currently spearheaded and carried out by the DEC, that the city's only role, as far as I can tell, is to facilitate and help the residents understand as quickly and thoroughly as possible. In that regard, I think things are moving in the right direction, and I want to give credit where credit is due. However, a parallel and actually just as important issue for the long term of Geneva is how the answer to the questions of how did we get to this place in the first place, how those are being answered. And on that, there has been no progress. In fact, it seems as though every time there's a meeting, they take 3 steps back. And I think, again, if they were writing a manual on how not to handle a controversial issue, it'd be a bestseller. They're doing it, that's like, I just can't kind of wrap my head around how it's not obvious how much their own city council's own actions are really just further alienating the public. And what happened last night is this total inversion of priorities. So I guess, Councilor Eddington feels put upon. And he has been called to task at the podium, from the podium. However, he's a public official. That comes with the territory.
Yep.
So, unfortunately, it seems like the focus has been on protecting his reputation, his image in the community, which just further communicates to the public that the environmental concerns are not the top of the ticket. And if anyone had actually been listening to the residents from the first place, they would have understood that being heard was the key point. The residents want to feel like someone cares and understands what's going on. But at every step of the way, when they try to pivot the conversation to personalities and how long someone's lived there and how involved they are or whatever, they just miss the point, and it's demoralizing. So, no, I don't think they've made any progress on that front.
So, a couple of my notes as I was watching it. Councilor Eddington seems to be the focus no matter what happens now. Right. At every single, they can have, the council can adopt all the rules in the world saying you can't mention any individual counselor by name.
You can't say their names.
it was clear that Mayor Alcock was having a very difficult time actually keeping that rule in play.
Right.
And to his credit, I think he did about as good a job as you possibly could do in that situation, because you have people coming up and speaking, and they're talking to a person. Inevitably, you are talking to a person, whether you call a name out or whether you don't call a name out, you are speaking to a person.
Or about a person.
Or, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a difficult to manage rule, and you have some people speaking and just saying, they're fanning the flames. Opposition is fanning the flames, and it sounds awfully familiar, because every one of these polarizing issues, just like the one in Seneca Falls, you get these two really far apart groups that have a very difficult time finding middle ground.
Right.
So I guess the interesting thing that I heard last night that I hadn't heard before were some questions. I can't recall who the speaker was individually, but some questions about the liability of landlords and how renters will be compensated in this whole situation. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, that's a key
because
point.
That is a completely different, everyone's talking about homeowners, everyone's talking about even some of the business owners, things like that. But what about the people who are just renting?
Yeah.
What about the landlords? What kind of position are they in? Right. Not only just the renters, but the people who actually own these. Those are a couple issues that, to me, I feel like the city really needs to take a hard look at and figure out and make sure that all of the plans that are being addressed and being handled are being handled appropriately. Because the thing that kind of piqued my interest on that was, so you sign a year lease. And sometimes renters live in one place for a decade, 2 decades, maybe longer. Other times, maybe it's just a year. Maybe it's just a year and a half.
Right.
What about the people who lived in a rental unit, say, for 2 years from 95 to 97 or 93 to 95 or, 2001 to 2003? They're long gone.
Right.
They probably haven't even thought about this in 20 years. They probably didn't even think about it when they lived there. And now this whole thing is bubbled up, and have they felt have they dealt with any health side effects from it or anything like that? To me, opens up an entire can of worms that, frankly, I don't think the city, DEC, or anyone has even begun to think about.
No, they haven't had. It's just like what we were talking about with Seneca Falls. They haven't created space or capacity to talk about the real durable cleanup issues in those regard, in that regard, as far as like restorative justice for people, because they can't get past the initial hurdle of protection, right? Of trying to insulate themselves from criticism. If council, first of all, this whole issue about not being able to say councilors' names is just ridiculous. That's not the rule. The rule is that you have to be addressing council as a whole. But if you're addressing council as a whole about a particular issue, if I want to say, the city manager said this, or, this staff person, the recreation director said this, I'm not out of line to say that, because how else am I going to convey what my exchange was with this particular person? And names are not off limits. That's just kind of that was a grasp that obviously didn't work. So I would not expect to see that rule, which was just made up on the fly, put into place again in the future, because that's...
To be fair, I don't think that rule would exist if a former city employee were not a city councilor now.
That might be true, although if you look back through the historical record, there's no lack of people coming up and railing against particular councilors and staff people at the meetings. And I don't just mean me, although there are people who I'm now friends with who, when I first got on council, took great pleasure in spending their time at the podium telling me that everything I was doing was incorrect. When Councilor Caprero and I did the blog, residents came up and complained about that. The city manager has been subject to numerous attacks from the podium. And when I say attacks, I mean directed statements, right? But again, public officials, public figures take that on when they take the job. If you don't have thick enough skin for it, you picked the wrong thing. So that's just kind of silly. So I don't want to spend any more time on that. Sorry, but as far as listening to people's concerns and coming up with solutions, unless you give people an opportunity to talk about their experience and you say that it's valid in some way, you aren't going to get to the answer. And there's just been this, council at the beginning could have said, we want to make this right. If we could have done things differently a long time ago, we would have. How do we make it right now? You would not be having the statements at the podium that you've been seeing. And it was just very telling last night that, I had a heads up about what was going to happen, because not everybody is unable to be level-headed about it. So I had some people reach out and say, hey, I think this is going off the rails. Here's what's going to happen. So I knew what I was walking into, but the visual, I think, sums up what was wrong last night. In the room, in all the seats, were people, friends and family of one particular counselor, there to give character testimony.
Right. And
out in the hall were the residents of the Foundry area, some of whom are elderly, some of whom are bilingual, some of whom were in wheelchairs. I was sitting out in the hall with everybody and saw everybody straining to hear the Foundry update, to hear what was going on. So that visual of what takes precedence really was telling about the situation as a whole and the situation last night. It really has become more about personalities than about the policy. And, and now you've got another counselor trying to say that speakers should be banned from addressing council. There should be a list of people not allowed to talk to council. If you could make yourself look more guilty, I'm not sure how it would be possible to make it look like something's...
I would classify a statement as grandstanding.
Well, it is grandstanding. It is grandstanding.
Objectively speaking.
And it's, sticking up for your friend and making it look like you're going to draw a line in the sand about this. But the fact of the matter is, if anybody were actually listening to what people, myself included, were actually saying, they would want the answers to these questions too, but they can't divorce themselves from this protectionism and not wanting to. Everyone's trying to save face, and nobody is trying to save lives and property and equity in people's homes.
So I think one of the things that I've noticed, I was at a meeting a couple months ago, and then I watched last night's meeting on local TV, of course. I kept asking myself the question every time someone from council or the city manager talked about the Foundry issue as a whole. I wondered how much they knew. Right. Because I genuinely wonder, because the city of Geneva is great about, compared to other municipalities, and I know some people who live in Geneva will feel like this is a completely false statement, but Geneva is really good about getting information out there.
Oh, I agree.
They are good about sending out press releases. They update their website frequently. Everything, they are good as far as getting a stream of information out there. And I haven't to date, at least not that I've found, there isn't this city resource available anywhere, to my knowledge, where it's kind of like this ever updated post or document or something where everything the city knows and can be relayed to the public in form of these updates, as an example, right, is being streamed and continually put in writing in a place where anyone can just quickly access it and just have that information in front of them, be done with it.
There's supposed to be, on the website, there's supposed to be an area dedicated to Foundry updates, but you're right that there isn't an online repository of the documents everybody keeps referencing, all the FOIL stuff, all the memos coming in from the DEC.
And it would just seems to me like it would make everything so much easier, and it would take so much of the heat off of city council. Right. If they just, and because of all this information through FOILs and through everything else, so much of this information is already in the public realm. Mm-hmm. What difference does it make now?
Yeah, I don't understand. I don't understand this fear of facts, as though, the facts are going to indict somebody. I don't think that's true. I don't think anybody has alleged that there's been criminal wrongdoing. I think people are just trying to figure out, why didn't a light go on in anybody's head that something serious was going on, and they'd better sound an alarm about it, either up the chain of command or out into the public.
Right.
And I think until council can acknowledge that that is a valid question, and that if it were their neighborhood, they'd have the same question and they'd want the same answer, as long as they keep casting it as you're trying to blame somebody, you're trying to embarrass somebody, no. But you have to ask, how did this happen? And otherwise, really, the problem going forward is the Foundry's not the only area where there's potential contamination in the city. It's an urban area. That's the struggle of renovating and revitalizing all urban areas.
Right.
So how do you make sure that this isn't going to be the story of every Geneva neighborhood, right? How can people trust that the government will say, it's our job to at least protect your health and safety baseline? And that is the duty, the moral duty.
The stuff that you have no control over.
Yeah.
That's the way I always look at it. Like, the stuff you have no control. You have no control over what factory was sitting on your property 70 years before you came along.
Yeah, and nobody's saying the city polluted the neighborhood. The city didn't operate the foundry. The city didn't look the other way while the foundry did all this stuff. It just happened. And the foundry is to blame, if you're talking about who did it. So it's not about blame. It's about process and accountability. But these guys are just scared of talking about stuff. They just box themselves in, and they want to say, my reputation is more important than anybody else. And that is really not a tenable position for an elected official anywhere to take.
Is this a scenario where there is some dancing around happening due to everyone in the back of their mind is probably someplace thinking criminal liability somewhere along the line, or at the very least some sort of negligence? And I just wonder if any part of that kind of thought process might be concerning some enough to a point where they clam up and they're not just being as open as some people feel they should be.
I suppose,
we're diving
some
deep into
people are
people's
always
minds
afraid
here.
of lawsuits, right?
Right, yeah.
But the city, I trust, has some pretty good attorneys. And I think that, again, I said it last time, right? That there are certainly words in the English language that could still be spoken that would help to communicate to people that they're being heard without the city exposing itself to any liability. But the legal fact of the matter is, and this has been stated and restated, and I actually had an opportunity to meet with the city attorney to talk about this, the city is insulated from liability. This is not a case where anybody's going to jail. And they know that. So to act as though, well, I can't say anything because there are going to be really bad repercussions. The only repercussions are political and pride, right? And what we're seeing is that ego is really carrying the day.
And yeah, this is one of those things where, again, you're not going to be at a resolution 6 months from now. You're not going to be at a resolution 18 months from now.
I don't know.
And this is something that it's going to be a long grind to a real solution.
I don't think it has to be that way.
Right.
I think they could still right this ship. Maybe I'm just an eternal optimist, right? I believe that Geneva has the capacity, primarily in staff, I have to say, in full disclosure, not necessarily the council, but Geneva has the capacity to recover from this and repair it and start to mend these broken relationships. But it's going to take people with the guts to be honest and the people with the character to say, all right, like, so we can't fix it. We can't undo it. Sorry, I mean, they can fix it, but we can't undo it, but we're going to make it better and make those statements believable, like with some feeling, you know? That's, you know, just being some human beings, having some empathy. And that's what's missing.
So jumping from one hot button controversial issue to another, one that you had a really, really, really interesting column in the Finger Lakes Times.
Right.
Last week, correct? Last Tuesday, I believe it was?
Yeah.
Yes, last Tuesday, about the checks that are sort of floating around Senate in right, wrong, gray area, maybe somewhere in between. Maybe some lawyers somewhere are sitting around a table trying to figure out what the hell they're supposed to do with these things.
Right.
So bring us up to speed on this issue, where it stands right now from your vantage point.
So I guess brief summary in case people weren't reading the local, regional papers,
This
websites.
pretty much made statewide news.
Oh, yeah. The New York Times has been covering it for weeks now. So New York State has this policy of granting Lulus. I don't know why they're called that. What a terrible name. Why does every bad policy have some horrible, like, short little name attached to it? But anyway, which are basically stipends that are given by the Senate leadership to select senators for positions they don't actually hold. So Pam Helming, not the only person, right? There were a handful, there were Republicans, and then there were also 8 Democrats in this independent Democratic caucus, conference, which is what allows the Senate to have a Republican majority. So on numbers-wise, the Senate does not have a Republican majority, but because of these 8 Democrats, they can get stuff done.
Right.
So as a thank you...
The most powerful people in New York State.
Yeah. So as a thank you, they get this compensation. So Pam Helming gets the checks as one of the people getting these Lulus. And she... I'm not going to presume to know what she thinks, but what she told the newspaper and other reporters from other news outlets is that it felt like getting extra money or extra change from Walmart, and she had to think about what she was going to do about it. So ultimately, and to her credit, she returned them. She never cashed them. It's not like she cashed them and then she got caught and then she sent the money back. She returned the checks. She got the checks in April and in March, and she returned them in the middle of May, but they were returned.
Was she able to actually return them?
Well, there's like this video of her trying to do it, and then she told the New York Times or someone...
That video was on her Facebook page.
And then somehow it was picked up by the New York Times that if they won't accept the checks, that she'll find some other way to return the money to the taxpayers.
Right.
But I trust her that she's not putting it in her pocket.
Right.
However, Tom O'Mara, senator from the Southern Tier, was interviewed, and I'm not even going to attempt to summarize his quote, paraphrase. So here it is. He says, when your boss, so to speak, comes to you and says, you're getting a raise, I say, thank you. Just this bold acceptance of, no, I don't chair the committee, but I'll accept the payment for it. And that's really indicative of Albany politics at the moment, or for a long time, right? And so I wrote a column about it that it's not like getting extra change at Walmart. It's not a couple bills stuck together. It's $12,000. It's money you didn't earn. There shouldn't be any pause whatsoever. You didn't earn it. It's not your money. I mean, it's taxpayer money. None of us would get can you imagine if you just said, guess what? The state accidentally sent me a check that should have gone to somebody else. Their mistake. I'm going to take it to the bank and spend my $12,000. It wouldn't fly for anybody. But their attorney issued a 4-page memo saying that it's constitutional and it's legal. Right. And unfortunately, Senator Helming joined her colleagues in standing behind that memo and saying that it is a legal practice. Okay, factually, legally, it might be legal, but she campaigned on ethics reform. We all know, through all the indictments that have come down and are yet to come, actually, that ethics reform is needed. So there's a chance to take a stand and do things differently. So I was quite disappointed, and her staff people didn't like my
If it isn't unethical, and here's my question. If it isn't unethical, why didn't she cash the checks?
Well, that's a good question.
So that's kind of where, and I understand. Like, I actually spoke with the senator. She called us, right? And she called the newsroom the day of that story initially being published. I think the first story was published by the New York Times, and then a couple days later, the Auburn Citizen ran a story, right. And that was the day that we received a call from her. And, she said that if she couldn't get it back to the comptroller, if she couldn't return it, she would find a charity to give it to. And I think that's great. That's wonderful. But to your point, there's a systemic issue here where, if nothing else, you're in this really weird gray area. And I was actually kind of surprised. You mentioned O'Mara's comments. I was actually kind of surprised that anyone were really willing to stand up and make bold comments, right, or even say anything at all, issue any kind of statement one way or another on it, before the dust settled. Right. Like, it seemed like everyone was out in front, like even before any lawyer made any decision or said anything one way or another about it. People were already coming forward saying, this is how I feel about it. This is how I feel about it. And that, to me, just seemed very, very un-Albany to me, that side of it. Because usually everything is very prepared. Everything is very... And this seemed more rogue, more like just kind of on the fringes in terms of how people were reacting to it.
I actually think the fact that people were so bold kind of illuminates what the problem is, because... talking to some of the staff, because that's what I did, start getting on the phone and calling people. If you want to know why people are saying what they say, then, call and ask. And, the staff response from several offices is just, well, this is always how it's been done. What's the big deal? People are trying to make it a big deal right now. This is the way people get paid, and there's nothing wrong with it. And the idea that everybody receiving this money and cashing the payments has come to terms with the fact or is willing to defend it, I think, to me, is really is scary as far as how much work is really needing to be done to clean up Albany. Because if they're going to be so bold and be like, yeah, I cashed it, everybody else got theirs, this is mine, that's a bad argument. I mean...
Well, okay, so I then ask to the question that you say was posed by some members of staff. This is just some people trying to make a big deal out of this. My question is, why is it a big deal?
Yeah.
Why is anyone trying to make this a big deal? It's not an election year.
Right.
It's sort of in the middle lull, almost to the end of conference. It just, to me, seems like a very peculiar situation from top to bottom. It seems strange. It's almost surreal to me.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because part of the dialogue in Geneva has been, why do these people care about what's going on in the Foundry area if they don't live there? Which is, I think, similar, this attitude about, why do people care? what these guys are getting paid. It's not an election year. It's not really, it's something people will forget about before the next election. So it's not benefiting anybody. So if you look at who's making a big deal out of this, it's these good government groups. What bothers me is that so many people think it's odd that unless it benefits you personally or politically, that you wouldn't care. I mean, of course I care that these people are getting these checks. It's wrong. If you really care about your community and you care about government, you don't want people doing the wrong thing.
Right.
So I think, some of the the good government groups that have commented about this said, you have to draw attention to these things every time they happen. Otherwise, people become used to it. It becomes normal. So, it's not... And I was very candid with Senator Helming's staff. This issue will never affect her reelection prospects in this district. It never will. But it's still worth talking about because she's in a position to do things differently and to do things better. Mm-hmm. So she shouldn't just go with the flow because she can. She should do the right thing. And... there's no angle. There's no one. There's no other angle.
You're saying that there's no reason for why they shouldn't be able to go out on a limb and basically make, kind of use this as a victory and say, hey, we're going to do the right thing and we're going to look at this seriously and everything else. And I'm almost looking at it from the opposite perspective, saying this is probably the least, sadly, this is probably the least corrupt thing happening in Albany in the grand scheme of things. Because it just seems with this constant, with the outside income, we're not talking about what's coming, what's being, this is documented. Right. There's a paper trail for this. Mm-hmm. The amount of money that moves from entity A to entity B and winds up at entity U. Right. Somehow down the line. To me, that's a much larger, and I feel like there are so many larger ethical issues in New York State taking it from that vantage point. Yeah. Where this, to me, just seems like the low-hanging fruit that's easy to knock off, easy to correct. Right. Make a decision as a group, as an entire body, since you have Democrats and Republicans on this, and correct it. Right. Either make the rules clearer so that if you do continue doing it, there's some sort of verbiage that clearly states and allows X, Y, and Z people to receive it under select circumstances. Yeah, but... So you don't have people being falsely named as chair people or vice chairs of committees, because that's just, that's silly.
But I'm going to say something to you that is usually said to me, and I feel kind of odd doing this, but I think your view might be a little naive on this, because I don't think this is the low-hanging fruit that isn't connected to anything else. Because if you look at who's doling out the money, Senator Flanagan from Long Island, and you think about the power struggle that's gone on with him and the legacy he's carried forward from Dean Skelos, and I'm not saying the Assembly and the Democrats aren't in the same issue, but this is what we've got right now. And if you look historically, who was getting paid and how they were voting on particular issues and how that was related to campaign finance and the LLC loophole, which we still haven't gotten to talk about, but it's all intertwined. And if you can start chipping away at some of this, I don't want to call it a quid pro quo because that ruffles everybody's feathers because that's a legal term. But if you can start chipping away at the network of influence, you're taking a step in the right direction. So for me, if you can stop these checks that are going to certain people who hang together and vote together or are expected to, then you can move on to the next thing.
So I agree. I totally agree that there are all of these issues are most likely connected in some way, shape, or form. But I'm saying this when I say the low-hanging fruit, when I make that argument, I'm saying from the perspective of they could save a lot of face by isolating this apart from the
Absolutely.
rest.
Absolutely.
Address it, and they'll kind of silence the critics for a little while, and then they'll also make their base, the people who are guaranteed to vote for them next year, feel really good about them handling the situation. And that's what I mean. I guess I should have worded that a little better, but just in terms of, of course, all of the unethical behavior in Albany is connected.
Right.
One way or another. But in terms of just being able to address this and move on, they had the opportunity.
Yeah.
I guess they still kind of have the opportunity.
I'm sensing a pattern. I think that this is the theme or thread of all the topics we've talked about so far. If people just handled things correctly from the get-go, it would reassure people and allow them to move on to other business. Mm-hmm. So, yes, you're right. That's how they should have handled, that's how the state Senate should have handled this issue. But by doubling down on it, they've really just made it worse and drawn more spotlight and more investigation into these payments. I mean, now there have been subpoenas. I mean, it is ramping up. And part of that was people were upset that some people just so boldly said, well, I don't owe you any explanation. And,
okay. So that was going to be my question to end this topic.
Oh, okay.
So when does this burn out? Because now it seems like it's picking up steam. Mm-hmm. And could this now, in theory, become an issue that is still an issue next year and affect some individuals' electability?
Well, it comes back to the same question of who knew what, when, and what did they do about it. Mm-hmm. And I think that those are still the unanswered questions here when it relates to Senator Helming, Senator O'Mara, and a lot of the downstate Democrats and Republicans who have been doled out these checks. Everybody's got a different story about who knew what, when, and whether they participated in this or not. And so I think that's where the investigation's going now, because the only thing that makes a bad situation worse is lying about it.
Right. Okay. So now we've got a couple quick topics that I wanted to hit before the end of the show. So this really unique, one of our columnists at FingerLakes1.com, Marie Kramer, former Macedon mayor, wrote this interesting piece on the recent vote in the Pelmac School District. So voters in Pelmac raised questions about the voting process, which was using hand-counted paper ballots, which is something as a general practice that hasn't been done in a really long time. Now we use the Scantrons. Mm-hmm. A bunch of years ago, they moved away from the lever system.
I know.
And some of the questions that popped up were there not enough machines in Wayne County to go around? Was there another reason for this voting method being used, kind of alluding to the corrupt possible side of it? Okay. Or was it just a matter of, it's a small election, who cares? It's just, we aren't going to go to all of this effort unnecessarily. So my question on this is, do we need a really super standardized method across the board that cannot be deferred from in any way, shape, or form to keep the process clean?
Well, I think there was a state statute that said that's what we're supposed to do. The elections law is supposed to standardize now our election process. I miss the lever machines. It felt like you were really voting. You were really, I know they broke down all the time. That was a problem. But
there was something very substantial about that. There's
yes, it just felt like you've done something. But I don't know. I can't imagine a hand-counted ballot. How many votes were there? That must have taken all night. But, that's how they used to do it. That's very quaint. But, it does raise a lot of questions. When people hear that now, they think, well, hand ballots. I don't know about that.
Right. But it's kind of like this forgotten in the rural world, like you're up in Wayne County, and I'm sure the same type of thing could, in theory, happen in Seneca County or Yates County or Steuben County. And you just get in these scenarios where, there isn't a ton of attention being paid to it, and especially with these really local, hyper-local elections where you get a really, really small turnout. And to me, it just seems to break down the process even more. It makes it even worse.
Yeah. Yeah. All in all,
we reached out to the Wayne County Board of Elections because someone might be sitting out there saying, "What are you talking about?" Did you reach? They hadn't gotten back. They haven't gotten back to us yet. Of course, we'll update that on fingerlakes1.com if they do. But even if there is a really hard, justifiable reason for it in their mind, perception is key, and I'm not just really so keen on that.
Yeah, had they not told people ahead of time, like when you get there, it's going to be this ballot, and here's why we're using this? I mean, that's what I understand. Like, just give an explanation and say, here's why we have to do it this way. People like transparency. You would be surprised. I mean, it seems to me like everybody's afraid of people's reactions. If you're just open and out there, like, here's the reason that this is happening, 99% of people are going to say, okay. But when it's a surprise, people are taken by surprise, or people feel like you're being sketchy or shady about your reasoning or something, that's when people start to question and speculate and lose trust. And it's hard to get that back. So why not just go the one extra step of explaining things in the first place?
Yep. So the last topic I wanted to hit tonight, of course, the flooding on Lake Ontario, 30-some inches above where it normally sits. The coastal community, Sodas Point, in particular, in our viewing area. Obviously, Greece has been really heavily impacted as well, but Sodas Point has just been assaulted for literally like the last 2 months. And the question that keeps bobbing around my head is enough being done? Funding is being made available. I believe the governor set aside $8 million or something to that effect, $40,000 maximum per homeowner to help with the costs of, fixing things. But, we had some really dramatic pictures that had come through the newsroom last month that showed homes literally teetering on the brink of falling in. And those homeowners were basically saying, $30,000 to $40,000 just to bring enough dirt in to bring everything back up to snuff. And that's going to have to be brought in on a barge, and maybe then you're talking about $50,000 or $60,000. And I just wonder if through all of these little, what feel like to me, symbolic pieces of legislation to correct something that is, I'm not going to say politically fueled. I don't think Plan 2014 has anything to do with this.
Yes, I agree with you on that.
Plan 2014, by the numbers that I've seen, 2 to 3 inches of rise out of the massive 2 feet plus that it has risen now. That, to me, is the difference maker. It's been a really wet spring. And I just wonder if these little symbolic pieces of legislation are really going to do anything for these people who are now going to have to not only deal with this now and clean up from this now when the lake finally comes back down, which I've heard in the best case scenario might be Labor Day, and in some of the less appealing options, maybe not until December. And
yeah, I was up there last weekend, actually, just going up to kind of survey what was happening, and I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but again, I guess my question is: are the people who are offering solutions in conjunction with the people actually affected? Has anybody from Albany, gone? And I don't mean just, state senator. I'm saying, are there any ways to widely solicit the input and experience of the residents and determine what are the plans that are going to best suit these situations? Because not every community is experiencing exactly the same set of primary concerns, right? So there's a set of concerns, but each group might prioritize them slightly differently. Yeah. And just saying, well, $40,000 per homeowner doesn't really seem like a nuanced approach. Right. So it's going to work great for a couple of people and not so well probably for the majority. But maybe if people were asked what would be most helpful and there could be some flexibility and government could be a little more nimble, then people would at least feel like they're supported. Not that they're going to be totally taken care of. I mean, I'm sure there's going to need to be some ombudsman with regard to insurance and stuff. But
that help exists.
Yeah.
I think the one, I do believe that one of the agencies that has some governing power over break wall building, I believe they've issued a wide net in terms of all permits are pretty much issued by default if you need to fix one of your break walls. But I just kind of think that we're in a scenario now where these are the kinds of wide nets that are going to have to be cast so that the system, which is really complex to begin with, doesn't make this an even more miserable situation for the people who live up there.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I agree with you.
We'll obviously be covering that more. And if now we're into their hits and misses. Hits and misses. What? I'll go first. I'll give you a second to gather your thoughts. My miss for the week, for the last couple weeks now, since I read the story in the Finger Lakes Times a couple days ago, Seneca County was railed for their handling of water and sewer. And it was from a state audit. And I think that has been a long time coming. And I think that kind of actually, in a strange way, matches the way most of the supervisors on the Seneca County board feel about it. They feel like it's been mismanaged, and it's now put them in a place where they can actually do something with it. Of course, getting bad marks is the reason why I'm putting it in the miss category, but I think they will ultimately turn it into a hit and do the right thing with it now.
Good.
That said, it was kind of tough to find a hit over the last 2-3 weeks. Before yesterday, I had actually put Seneca Falls in the hit category, and I had to take it out because of the lawsuit and how it kind of seems like we're slipping back into this this falling over. So unfortunately, I have no hit.
Really?
I have no hit. There is no good way to spin any of these things.
Learn how to see the bright side in things.
That's why you're here, Jackie.
My hit has nothing and everything to do with local politics, and that was James Comey's testimony today.
Ooh, I'll give that a hit too.
Which I don't fault him for the email thing. I think he did the right thing. I think he is a guy that goes by the book and fulfills his obligations and does his duty regardless of the political consequences. And I say kudos to him because we need a lot more of that in all levels of government. So I found his I was totally riveted to the TV all morning. I got very little done on my to-do list today because it was so captivating to just see a guy who, maybe I'm naive, I believed every word he said. I mean, it was just,
the fact that he was open enough to actually borderline incriminate himself in saying that he was the one who leaked it to a friend who, and that kind of, if you're willing to go that far, I agree. Like
Yeah, he took responsibility for the things he needed to take responsibility for, and he was just very candid. And he wasn't dramatic. He didn't point the finger. He didn't go too far in drawing conclusions. He just stated the facts. So that was definitely my hit, and I hope that kind of attitude can trickle down. There's some trickle down policy for us.
That is some trickle down.
My miss, well, let's see. We already talked about some of it. So, okay, here's another miss that ties local to national. Mm-hmm. So right after Comey's testimony, they had, Trump was giving a talk, and then he took some questions from reporters, and he was asked, what'd you think about Comey's testimony? And he just said, thank you, and sat there. And I just watched a video that was taken at this Coffee with the Counselors on Saturday where the counselors were asked about the Foundry issue. Mm-hmm. And residents from the Foundry said, why not just as a friend didn't you give me a heads up? Why, And the response was, thank you. Next question. To which someone said that wasn't a statement, it was a question. Mm-hmm. And they got, thank you. That is not okay. That's a miss. That is definitely a miss. That's not how you engage the public.
And unfortunately, engaging the public is something that we've talked about a lot and we'll be talking about a lot in the foreseeable future, because it seems to be the one big issue that connects all of the things we talk about every other week here.
True.
Well, that's going to do it for this week's podcast. We will be back probably in about 2 weeks, unless something miraculous happens. In the meantime, definitely check us out on Facebook, like the page, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and give us a follow on Twitter. Thanks for listening, and we will be back in 2 weeks.